You step into a country where Baroque palaces and Alps-topped skylines share the same horizon, and where the people who call it home come from centuries of empire, waves of migration, and modern moves for work, safety, and lifestyle. Imagine trams clacking through Vienna, a Tyrolean valley whispering with ski lift hum, and cities humming with new languages. This video peels back the layers of Austria's most significant groups, who they are, how they got here, why people keep coming, and what housing looks like for someone dreaming of a flat in Vienna or a chalet in Tyrol. Quick reality check before we start. Roughly 1/4 of Austria's people have a migration background, an important backdrop to every story we'll tell. First, the native Austrians, the German-speaking majority whose cultural and political history shaped the nation we know today. Austria's identity grew out of the Habsburg Empire, a patchwork of peoples and lands where Vienna became a cultural magnet in music, philosophy and architecture. For centuries, movement within the empire meant people from Bohemia, Hungary and the Balkans repeatedly flowed into Austrian cities. After World War II, internal shifts and post-war rebuilding shaped a modern social contract focused on social insurance, public housing and regional identity. Today native Austrians often balance pride in local traditions, the Heuriger wine taverns, Volksmusik, ski culture, with a pragmatic acceptance of newcomers who staff hospitals, construction sites, and tech firms. Where they settle depends on work and lifestyle. Older generations often remain in small towns or alpine villages, while younger people cluster in Salzburg, Graz and Vienna for education and jobs. When it comes to housing, Austrians benefit from a historically strong rental market, but buying is still popular in suburbs and regions outside big cities. Nationally, the median price per square meter for dwellings has hovered around €4,000 in recent years and houses about €2,700 per square meter. Figures that give a baseline feeling for what home costs in Austria. Converted at a mid-2025 average exchange rate of roughly $1.12 per euro. That's about $4,480 per square meter for dwellings and $3,030 per square meter for houses. Useful if you're converting into dollars in your head while scrolling listings. Next up, Germans in Austria. They're the largest non-Austrian nationality in the country and a special case because cultural and linguistic proximity makes migration relatively seamless. Same language, similar job markets, and family or cross-border ties. German citizens in Austria include students, professionals relocating for jobs in Vienna's international firms, and people choosing the calmer pace of Austrian regions while keeping German business links. Historically these movements were small and elite. After EU enlargement and freer labor movement, larger numbers relocated for opportunities and lifestyle. For many Germans, buying property in Austria is attractive because of strong public services, scenic regions and cross-border convenience, though prices vary dramatically by region. In Vienna and popular urban neighborhoods, Germans compete with locals for modern flats. In places like Tyrol and Salzburg, they may invest in holiday properties. The cost picture for someone hunting a 70 to 100 square meters apartment in Vienna is different from a family house in Lower Austria. City apartments can command well above the national dwelling median, while two-story houses outside urban cores remain closer to the house median. The practical appeal for Germans is that transfer and residency paperwork is straightforward, while the emotional pull is Austria's lifestyle, mountains, winter sports and a quieter pace combined with excellent public services. Romanians are one of the fastest growing groups in Austria, drawn by jobs, EU mobility and the promise of stable wages. Many Romanians came first as seasonal or contract workers in construction, care work and hospitality. Over time, many settled, formed communities and brought families across. The historical thread here is post-EU expansion. Romania's accession to the EU and Austria's labor demand created a steady flow, which accelerated around specific recruitment waves and chain migration patterns. Romanians tend to cluster in Vienna and in industrial regions, though you'll find communities in smaller towns too. Their reasons for moving are practical: higher wages, better social services, and education opportunities, and increasingly long-term, homeownership, family stability, and entrepreneurship. In terms of housing, Romanians follow the local market. Renting is common early on, with buying coming after citizenship or stable employment is secured. National averages give context, but remember this group's housing experience varies. A young Romanian care worker in Vienna is likely to rent a compact flat near transport hubs, while a Romanian family who has lived in Austria for a decade may buy a suburban house, aligning with the country median house price per square meter. Turkish Austrians represent one of the most established migrant stories in the country. Movements that began in the mid-20th century with guest worker recruitment and evolved into deep-rooted communities. Turkish migrants originally came to fill post-war labor shortages in factories and construction. Many stayed, brought families and created vibrant neighborhoods, businesses and cultural institutions. Generations later, Turkish Austrians are entrepreneurs, students, and professionals, yet their presence also sparked political debates about integration, citizenship and identity, debates that shaped Austria's social policy and public discourse. Housing patterns among Turkish Austrians historically concentrated in urban districts with affordable rental options and strong community networks. Think family flats in Vienna's dense districts, not sprawling single-family homes. Although economic mobility has led many to suburban homeownership. For someone curious about prices, apartments in multicultural urban neighborhoods can be more affordable than central luxury districts, but the national dwelling median still sets a baseline that many families used when deciding between renting and buying. The Turkish community's long presence in Austria also means an established network that makes finding work and housing support easier for new arrivals. Serbians and the broader former Yugoslav communities, Croatians, Bosnians, form another vital chapter. Waves arrived at different times. Yugoslav guest workers in the 1960s and 70s, refugees in the 1990s from the wars in the Balkans, and then family reunifications and labor migration in later decades. These experiences shaped diverse economic trajectories. Early guest workers often worked in industry and construction and, over decades, opened restaurants, trades businesses, and cultural associations, businesses that anchor neighborhoods and create social capital. Refugees arriving in the 1990s added a dimension of trauma and resilience. Many rebuilt lives and invested in housing once employment stabilized. Housing for these communities historically leaned toward affordable urban rentals and smaller owner-occupied homes in the suburbs as families gained stability. The reasons people from these countries moved to Austria combined geography, its nearby, labor markets, and safety, particularly for those arriving during conflict. Today, second-generation Serbians and Bosnians are present in universities and white-collar jobs, blurring old stereotypes and participating in broader Austrian life. Again, housing choices vary with income and where people settled. City districts near workplaces for younger adults, and more spacious suburban houses for families who've had time to save and invest. Hungarians and Slovenians represent long-standing cross-border ties that predate modern migration statistics. Some of these flows go back to Habsburg times, others to post-war boundary shifts and economic draw. Because Austria borders both Hungary and Slovenia, labor and family ties have been historically fluid. Bilingualism in border regions and cross-border commuting are common. These groups often have a hybrid identity. People who work in Austria but maintain cultural life across the border, or families with properties in both countries. Housing decisions reflect proximity and practicality. Many Hungarian and Slovenian workers live close to the border to minimize commute, sometimes choosing Austrian housing because wages and services are higher while still keeping strong ties to hometowns. For buyers, certain border regions are attractive for lower prices than urban centers while maintaining access to Austrian social benefits. This cross-border dynamic shows how migration is not always a one-way move. It can be a carefully balanced life between two homes. Ukrainian and Syrian newcomers represent more recent, urgent migration waves, often driven by conflict and protection needs, though the economic pull is also significant for Ukrainians who were already moving for work. The Ukrainian influx after 2022 was large and rapid. Many arrived seeking safety, work, and schooling. Syrians came in earlier waves during the mid-2010s and later through various protection pathways. These groups often arrive with different starting points. Some quickly find employment in care, hospitality, or logistics thanks to labor shortages, while others rely on refugee support systems and integration programs. Housing for people arriving under protection often begins in temporary accommodations, shelters, or shared rentals. Long-term stability requires access to work and benefits that enable moving into the private rental market or buying later. Austria's integration programs, language courses and labor market pathways determine how fast families move from temporary housing to permanent homes. These stories remind us that migration isn't only economic. It's often life and death, and the housing path is frequently longer and more precarious for people arriving as refugees. Poles, Croatians and other EU nationals form a mosaic of mobile workers, students, seasonal workers, and professionals who use EU mobility to seek better pay or specific training opportunities. Polish workers are common in logistics, construction and tech. Croatians are part of the historical cross-border flows and newer labor patterns. These groups are often highly pragmatic about housing, short-term rentals, shared flats for young workers in cities, and house purchases for those staying long-term. A major reason they move is economic opportunity. Austria's wages and social protections often outperform neighboring labor markets, but lifestyle and family considerations also matter. For many young EU nationals, Austria is a stepping stone, a place to earn, learn German, and decide whether to settle or move elsewhere in Europe. Housing becomes a tangible marker of that decision. Do you sign a 2-year rental, or save for a deposit on a suburban home? The data on who arrives and why shows that economic cycles, recruitment drives and family links all matter. Let's pause on the practical, housing numbers because that's the question everyone asks in the comments. Statistics show a median dwelling price near roughly €4,000 per square meter and houses near €2,700 per square meter in recent official releases, a reasonable baseline for national comparisons. After a 2023 dip in some areas, 2024 nudged prices up slightly again for some segments, and mid-2025 snapshots show regional extremes. For example, Tyrol and ski resort zones can command many times the national house median for premium chalets and apartments, while interior rural districts remain much cheaper. If you use a simple example, a 90 square meters apartment at €4,000 per square meter costs €360,000, roughly $403,000 using an average 2025 euro to dollar rate near $1.12. While a 120 square meter suburban house at €2,700 per square meter is €324,000 or about $363,000. These are rough math examples meant to give viewers a feel for scale, and yes, region and condition change everything. Vienna, as the capital, generally sits above the national median for apartments. Desirable alpine regions spike even more. So whether you're a German professional, a Romanian care worker, or a Ukrainian family, your price reality depends heavily on which Austrian postcode you pick. Why do people move to Austria? The answers mix economy, safety, family, and lifestyle. For many EU citizens it's simple economics, better wages, reliable healthcare, and an efficient public system. For refugees it's safety, protection and the chance to rebuild. For long-established migrant communities, Turkish, former Yugoslav, generational stories, work, family reunification, entrepreneurship, explain the flow. For professionals and knowledge workers, Austria offers a high quality of life, Central European location, and cities like Vienna that rank highly on livability lists. Add language and cultural proximity, for Germans, Hungarians, Slovenians, and you get practical ease of settling. And don't forget the lifestyle draw. alpine access, cultural festivals, a strong public transport system, and relatively clean air in many regions. All of these push and pull factors shape where people go, how they integrate, and whether they rent or buy. The housing market responds to these flows. Demand from migrants and locals pushes pricing in cities and cooling in some rural areas, but government housing policy and supply constraints also play big roles. A short look at aspiration and mobility. Younger migrants often arrive with the clear intention to stay only if a certain threshold is met: a stable job, affordable childcare, or a pathway to citizenship. That makes rental markets thrive. Shared flats, modest apartments near transit, and co-living arrangements are staples for the first 5 to 10 years. Families, once stabilized and with savings, aim for suburban houses where schools and yards exist, aligning with the national house median and regional price variance we discussed earlier. Long-term migrants who become citizens or permanent residents invest in homeownership not only for shelter but as a route to stability and intergenerational wealth. This pattern holds for many of the groups we discussed: initial rental phase, employment consolidation, then buying if conditions permit. The timing differs by profession, legal status and capital, and those details explain why housing strategies vary so much between a newly arrived care worker and a mid-career engineer transferring from Munich. If you're thinking of moving here, or just curious, taxes, permits, language and job recognition matter. EU citizens have easier movement and employment. Third country nationals face visa and permit rules that vary by purpose: work, family reunification, asylum. Migration is the core driver of population growth in recent years, not natural increase, so policy changes matter a lot for future flows. Integration programs, housing subsidies and regional development efforts shape whether migrants stay in cities or spread to smaller towns, which in turn affects local housing prices and social dynamics. For practical buyers, paying attention to regional price per square meter, commuting times, and whether the area is touristy, and thus pricier, will save surprises. For renters, understanding deposit norms, contract lengths and tenant protections is key. If you want the up-to-the-minute price for a specific postcode or neighborhood, check local listings and district statistics. National medians are only the starting point. Wrapping up, Austria's story is not a single thread but a woven tapestry. Native Austrians shaping the cultural core, long-term migrant communities adding depth, EU movers and recent refugees each changing the fabric in their own way. Housing sits at the intersection of all these stories. It's where work, family, language and policy meet concrete realities like a per square meter price and a lease contract. If you remember one thing, roughly 1 in 4 Austrians today has a migration background, and the top foreign national groups, Germans, Romanians, Turks, Serbians, reflect economic ties, geographic proximity and historical waves of movement. Whether you're watching from abroad or planning a move, the cost of home in Austria depends more on where you put down roots than the passport you hold. But your migration story will certainly shape how quickly you get there. Thanks for sticking with this deep dive into Austria's people and housing. If you found it interesting, give this video a like, subscribe for more stories about life and migration across Europe, and drop a comment about which country or community you'd like to see covered next. It really helps shape future videos and keeps this channel growing. See you in the next one.